A paraplegic millionaire is left at the altar and decides to replace the bride with his housemaid. She agrees, and although the marriage starts as a deal to protect his image, it begins to evolve into something deeper. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Stay tuned. The sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of the cathedral, casting rainbow patterns across the meticulously arranged floral displays. The air was heavy with the scent of lilies and roses, mingling with the soft murmurs of anticipation from the 500 guests that filled the pews. This was supposed to be the day when Marco Bennett, one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs, would finally find happiness. Marco sat in his customized wheelchair at the altar, his tailored Armani tuxedo perfectly fitted to his athletic upper body. Despite being paralyzed from the waist down after a skiing accident 8 years ago, he had rebuilt his life with remarkable resilience, turning his software company into a billion-dollar enterprise. At 36, he had achieved everything he had ever dreamed of professionally, but personally there had always been a void, one he believed Victoria Sinclair would fill. "She's late," whispered James, his best man and business partner, glancing nervously at his watch. Marco forced a smile. Victoria has never been on time for anything in her life. But 30 minutes became 45, and the cathedral grew increasingly restless. Marco's smile faltered, and a trickle of sweat ran down his back despite the air conditioning. His phone vibrated in his pocket, and with trembling hands he pulled it out to read the message. "I can't do this, Max, I'm sorry. This isn't the life I want." The words blurred before his eyes. He looked up, scanning the faces of the guests, his family, friends, business associates, all waiting for a bride who would never arrive. Just as he was about to announce the devastating news, Victoria herself appeared at the entrance of the cathedral, not in her wedding gown, but in a sleek black dress. The collective gasp from the assembled guests echoed through the hallowed space as she strode down the aisle, her heels clicking against the marble floor with determined precision. "I think I owe you all an explanation," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "I can't marry Marco. Not today, not ever." Marco felt his world crumbling as Victoria approached the altar, her blue eyes cold and calculating beneath her perfectly styled blonde hair. "Marriage should be based on passion, on fulfillment," she continued, addressing the congregation rather than him. "But what Marco offers is a partnership of convenience, a business arrangement disguised as love." She turned to him, her gaze piercing. "You've never truly seen me, Marco. You've seen an accessory, a suitable companion for your public image, someone to push your chair and smile at your side during corporate events." The cruelty of her words in this most public forum left Marco breathless. Heat flooded his face, and his hands gripped the armrests of his wheelchair until his knuckles turned white. "Victoria, please," he managed, his voice barely audible. "Let's discuss this privately." But Victoria wasn't finished. "I tried to make it work, truly I did. But the truth is, a marriage like this would be a prison for both of us. You deserve someone who can love you unconditionally, wheelchair and all. And I deserve someone who can give me the full life I want." With that parting blow, she turned and walked back down the aisle, leaving Marco surrounded by pitying glances and hushed whispers. The humiliation burned through him like acid, all the more painful because deep down he'd always feared this moment, feared that no one could truly love him after his accident. In the chaos that followed, as James tried to address the guests, and Marco's mother wept openly, only one person approached him directly. Elena Rodriguez, his housekeeper of 3 years, quietly appeared at his side. Her dark eyes filled not with pity, but with a steady calm that somehow anchored him. "Mr. Bennett," she said softly, her slight accent more pronounced in her emotion, "let me take you home." When they reached his penthouse overlooking Central Park, Elena efficiently dismissed the waiting catering staff and the decorators who had transformed the space for the planned reception. Marco sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the city below, still wearing his wedding tuxedo, a mockery of his shattered hopes. Elena brought him a glass of water, and stood silently nearby, her presence unobtrusive, yet somehow comforting. At 32, she had worked for Marco since he'd purchased the penthouse, managing his household with quiet efficiency. She was always simply there, reliable and steadfast, a constant in his chaotic life. "I warned you about her," Elena finally said, breaking the heavy silence. Her words held no accusation, just a simple statement of fact. Marco turned to look at her, really seeing her perhaps for the first time. Elena was attractive in an understated way, with her olive skin and dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. She wore a simple dark blue dress, the outfit she'd chosen to attend his wedding as a guest at his insistence. "You did, didn't you?" he acknowledged, remembering her cautious words when he'd announced his engagement. "You never said why." Elena hesitated, smoothing her hands over her skirt. "It wasn't my place." "It is now," Marco insisted. "Tell me what you saw that I missed." "She called your home when you were away," Elena said carefully. "I overheard her conversations. She spoke about your condition with disgust, about your money with desire. She talked about the prenuptial agreement with her friends, looking for ways around it. The revelation struck Marco like a physical blow. And you didn't tell me." "I tried, Mr. Bennett. Subtly at first, then more directly. You said I was imagining things, that I didn't understand how people in love speak to each other." Her eyes held no reproach, just quiet dignity. "You were so sure she was different." As the afternoon wore on, Marco's humiliation curdled into anger. His phone buzzed constantly with messages of sympathy, news alerts about the scandal, and worst of all, a detailed email from Victoria outlining why she had chosen such a public rejection. She claimed it was for his own good, to help him see the truth of their relationship, but Marco recognized the calculated cruelty for what it was, Victoria ensuring her 15 minutes of fame at his expense. By evening, the story had gone viral. "Tech billionaire abandoned at altar," screamed the headlines, accompanied by photos of him sitting alone in the cathedral and Victoria's dramatic exit. The commentary was merciless, with speculation about why she had left him ranging from his disability to rumors of infidelity. As Elena prepared to leave for the day, Marco made an impulsive decision born of wounded pride and desperate loneliness. "Marry me," he said abruptly, the words hanging in the air between them. Elena froze, her hand on her purse. "What?" "Marry me," Marco repeated, wheeling his chair toward her. "Tomorrow we'll show them all that I don't need Victoria's pity or approval." "Mr. Bennett, Marco, you're not thinking clearly," Elena replied, her calm voice a stark contrast to his feverish proposal. "This is the hurt talking." "Maybe," he acknowledged, "but it makes perfect sense. You've been more loyal to me than anyone in my life. You've seen me at my worst, and you're still here. You tried to protect me from Victoria. That doesn't mean—" "We should get married," Elena reasoned, though something flickered in her eyes, a moment of consideration that gave Marco hope. "It would be a mutually beneficial arrangement," he pressed on. "You'd have financial security for life. I'd have someone I can trust by my side. We already live together in a manner of speaking." "You're talking about marriage like it's a business contract," Eleanor objected, but her voice had softened. "Isn't that more honest than pretending it's about love?" Marco countered. "Victoria was right about one thing. I need someone who accepts me as I am. You've never treated me differently because of this." He gestured toward his wheelchair. Elena was silent for a long moment, studying his face. "You would regret this," she finally said. "When the pain passes, you would resent me." "I won't," Marco insisted. "I know exactly what I'm offering and asking for. A partnership based on respect and trust, not false promises and hidden agendas." As the night deepened around them, Eleanor found herself considering his proposal more seriously. Her life had been one of constant struggle, immigrating from Arizona to New York after her parents returned to Mexico, working multiple jobs to support herself through community college, building a reputation as a trusted household manager for wealthy clients. Marrying Marco would transform her circumstances overnight. Yet it wasn't the money that tempted her. It was the genuine respect in his eyes when he looked at her, the acknowledgement of her worth as a person. After years of invisibility in the homes where she worked, being truly seen was more valuable than any fortune. If, and I mean if, I were to consider this, Elena said carefully, there would have to be conditions. Marco nodded, a glimmer of his business acumen returning. Name them. This stays between us, the real reason I mean. To the world we've been secretly in love all along. Agreed. I maintain my independence. I keep working, not as your housekeeper, obviously, but at something meaningful. Of course. And Elena hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. If either of us meets someone we truly love, we end this amicably. Marco considered her terms, then extended his hand. Deal. When Elena tentatively placed her hand in his, neither of them realized that their impulsive agreement would change both their lives in ways neither could imagine. And as they sat together in the gathering darkness, the city lights winking on below them, the first fragile threads of genuine connection began to form between them, tenuous but surprisingly strong. Outside, the first photographers had already gathered, hungry for a glimpse of the jilted billionaire. But inside, shielded from the world's judgment, Marco and Elena were laying the foundation for something neither had expected to find, a sanctuary in each other. The ceremony took place in Marco's penthouse just 48 hours after Victoria's dramatic exit. Judge Robert Harrington, an old family friend, officiated with a mixture of confusion and concern, poorly hidden behind his professional demeanor. Only James stood witness, his expression cycling between disbelief and grudging support as Marco and Elena exchanged simple gold bands. "You're making a mistake," James had argued earlier that morning, cornering Marco in his home office. "I understand you're hurting, but this is insanity." "It's my decision," Marco had replied firmly. "Elena has been the only constant in my life for years. She sees me, James. Not the chair, not the money, just me." "She's your housekeeper," James had hissed, lowering his voice, though Elena was nowhere nearby. "How do you know she's not just after your fortune?" Marco's gaze had hardened. "If I recall correctly, you were the one who vetted Victoria's background. How did that turn out?" The cutting remark had silenced James, but his disapproval remained palpable throughout the brief ceremony. Afterward, as Judge Harrington departed with final congratulations and James made a hasty exit with barely concealed concern, Marco and Elena found themselves alone in the vast penthouse, married strangers facing an uncertain future. "Well, Mrs. Bennet," Marco said, attempting lightness despite the weight of what they'd done, "how does it feel?" Elena looked down at the unfamiliar ring on her finger. "Strange," she admitted honestly, "like I'm playing a part in someone else's life." Her candor surprised a genuine laugh from Marco. "At least we're starting with honesty." That first evening as husband and wife was awkward, yet oddly peaceful. They shared a quiet dinner, prepared by Elena, despite Marco's insistence that she was no longer his employee. Afterward, she helped him navigate his evening routine, the familiar rhythm of their previous employer-employee relationship, providing a comfortable structure amid the strangeness of their new circumstances. "I've had the guest room prepared." "For myself," Elena announced as night fell, her tone matter-of-fact. Marco nodded, relieved by her practicality. "Thank you for all of this, Elena." She paused at the doorway of his bedroom, her expression unreadable. "Good night, Marco." "Good night, Elena." The next morning, reality crashed into their quiet arrangement with the force of a hurricane. Marco's phone exploded with notifications, and when Elena checked her own rarely used social media accounts, she found thousands of friend requests and messages, many viciously questioning her sudden elevation from staff to spouse. Rebound bride. Bennett billionaire marries Maid after wedding disaster, blared the headline on the New York Post's website, accompanied by a grainy photo of Elena entering the building in her work clothes months earlier. Marco's family reacted with predictable outrage. His mother, Vivian Bennett, a Boston socialite whose family fortune predated Marco's tech success, called in a state of barely contained fury. "What have you done?" she demanded, her cultured voice crackling through the speakerphone. "Have you completely lost your mind?" "I've married someone I trust," Marco replied calmly, meeting Elena's eyes across the breakfast table. "Someone who's been by my side for years." "She's been by your side because you pay her," Vivian retorted. "This is a transparent ploy for your money, Marco. You need to annul this immediately before she gets her hooks in deeper." Elena flinched visibly at the words, and something protective stirred in Marco. "Elena is my wife now, Mother. You will respect that, or you won't be welcome in our home." After the call ended, Elena sat silent, her coffee untouched. "Perhaps your mother is right," she finally said. "This was impulsive. People will never accept it." "Since when do you care what people think?" Marco challenged. "The Elena I know has always been proudly independent, unbothered by others' opinions. The Elena you know cleaned your home and did your laundry," she replied softly. "This is different. I'm not ashamed of my work, but I'm not prepared for the scrutiny that comes with being Mrs. Bennet." Marco wheeled himself closer to her, meeting her gaze directly. "Then we'll face it together. We made a deal, Elena. I need you to honor it." The first real test of their arrangement came 3 days later at the quarterly board meeting of Bennet Technologies. Marco had insisted Elena accompany him, partly as a statement to the world, and partly because he genuinely valued her observant nature. Elena entered the sleek boardroom in a navy dress she'd purchased the previous day, simple but elegant, her hair styled in loose waves rather than her usual practical bun. The conversation died as heads turned, and Marco felt a surge of pride at her dignified composure under their scrutiny. "Gentlemen, ladies," he announced, "I'd like to introduce my wife, Elena Bennet." The board members offered polite congratulations that couldn't disguise their confusion and, in some cases, disapproval. Throughout the meeting, Elena sat quietly, beside Marco, absorbing the complex discussions about market strategy and upcoming product launches. Occasionally, she would lean over to whisper a question in his ear, her intelligence evident in the perceptiveness of her queries. It was during the tense discussion about the company's declining stock price, a direct result of the wedding scandal and subsequent hasty marriage, that Victoria made her move. She strode into the boardroom unannounced, stunning the assembly into silence. "I apologize for interrupting," she said smoothly, her designer suit and perfect makeup a stark contrast to the disheveled woman who had fled the cathedral. "But I believe I have information relevant to this discussion." Marco's hands tightened on the armrests of his wheelchair. "This is a private meeting, Victoria. You have no right to be here." Victoria smiled, the expression not reaching her eyes. "Actually, as you know, I own shares in Bennet Technologies through my father's investment firm. Small but enough to grant me observer status." She turned to the board. "I'm concerned about the company's direction under its current leadership, Marco's. Impulsive decisions in his personal life reflect a pattern of instability that should worry us all." Eleanor sat perfectly still beside Marco, but he could feel the tension radiating from her. Under the table, he reached for her hand, finding it cold but steady. "Ms. Sinclair," interjected Diane Larson, the senior board member, "while shareholders have legitimate concerns about the company's stability, this intrusion is inappropriate. If you have official business, please schedule it through proper channels." Victoria's composure slipped momentarily, revealing the anger beneath. "I'm simply concerned about Marco," she insisted, her gaze shifting to Eleanor with undisguised contempt. "And about the suspicious timing of this so-called marriage to a woman who has been positioning herself in his household for years. The public deserves to know if Bennet Technologies is being infiltrated through manipulation of its vulnerable CEO." The accusation hung in the air, vicious and calculated. Before Marco could respond, Eleanor stood, her movement drawing all eyes. "Ms. Sinclair," she said, her voice soft but unwavering, "I understand your disappointment. Truly I do. It must be difficult to realize you've miscalculated so badly." She stepped toward Victoria, confidence in every movement. "But your attempt to salvage your reputation by attacking mine will not succeed. Marco and I have built something real over years of daily interaction and mutual respect." "What did you build in your time together?" besides a publicity strategy? The boardroom fell silent, the members watching the confrontation with undisguised fascination. Victoria's perfectly manicured hand tightened around her designer purse. "You're nothing but an opportunist," she hissed, dropping all pretense of concern, "a glorified servant who saw a chance and took it." "Perhaps," Eleanor acknowledged with remarkable composure, "but I've never needed to publicly humiliate someone to feel important. And I've never abandoned a man I claim to love at the altar to increase my social media following." Victoria blanched, confirming Eleanor's suspicion about the calculated nature of the cathedral spectacle. Without another word, she turned and stalked from the boardroom, the click of her heels fading down the hallway. In the aftermath of her departure, the board meeting resumed with a new energy, several members eyeing Elena with newfound respect. Marco found himself watching his unexpected wife with similar reassessment, surprised by her courage and quick thinking. The tension of the confrontation dissipated over dinner that evening at 11 Madison Park, where Marco had insisted on celebrating Elena's handling of Victoria. As they savored the exquisite tasting menu, Elena gradually relaxed, even laughing as Marco recounted the expressions on the board members' faces. "I've never spoken to anyone like that," she admitted, sipping the wine she'd initially hesitated to accept. "In my position, you learn to be invisible, to absorb insults without reacting." "Your position has changed," Marco reminded her gently. Elena met his gaze directly. "Has it? We both know what this marriage is, Marco. A convenient arrangement for both of us. Maybe," he conceded. "But that doesn't mean it can't evolve into something more meaningful than we anticipated." A shadow passed over Eleanor's face. "Don't confuse gratitude with other feelings," she warned softly. "I helped you save face, nothing more." But as the weeks passed, their relationship shifted in subtle ways neither had anticipated. Eleanor gradually moved into overseeing Marco's charitable foundation, her natural organization, and empathy, making her surprisingly effective in the role. Marco found himself valuing her perspective on business matters, her outsider viewpoint, often cutting through the tech industry groupthink that plagued his executive team. They developed routines together, breakfast on the terrace when weather permitted, weekly movie nights where they alternated choices, quiet evenings reading in companionable silence. Marco began sharing stories of his childhood, of the skiing accident that had changed his life, of his struggles and triumphs, building his company from nothing. Eleanor, more reserved by nature, slowly revealed pieces of her own history. Her parents returned to Mexico when she was 18, leaving her alone in Arizona. Her determination to finish her education while working multiple jobs. Her dream of eventually starting a small business of her own. 6 weeks into their marriage, they attended a gala benefiting spinal cord research, a cause deeply personal to Marco. As they entered the ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, heads turned and whispers followed them. Marco was accustomed to such attention, but Eleanor still stiffened slightly beside him. "Ignore them," he murmured, guiding his chair smoothly alongside her. "You look beautiful tonight." Eleanor did indeed look stunning in a deep emerald gown that complemented her olive skin and dark eyes. The dress, selected during a shopping trip with a personal stylist Marco had arranged, transformed her from the practical housekeeper to an elegant woman who commanded attention. "Marco Bennett, as I live and breathe," called a familiar voice, and Marco turned to see Susan Reynolds approaching, an old friend from his college days at MIT. And this must be the bride who's caused such a stir. Susan embraced Marco warmly, then extended her hand to Elena. "I've been dying to meet you. Anyone who can put Victoria Sinclair in her place deserves a medal." Elena smiled, her natural dignity evident even in her discomfort. "It's a pleasure to meet you. Marco speaks highly of your work in AI ethics." As Susan engaged Elena in conversation about the Foundation's recent initiatives, Marco watched his wife with growing admiration. She navigated the social complexities of his world with increasing confidence, her intelligence and genuine compassion shining through the initial awkwardness. Later, as they danced, Eleanor, standing close enough to the wheelchair to create the illusion of traditional movement while Marco guided them in gentle circles. He found himself studying the curve of her neck, the warmth of her eyes, with an appreciation that transcended their practical arrangement. "What are you thinking?" Eleanor asked, catching his intense gaze. "That I'm beginning to understand why people risk everything for connection," Marco replied honestly, "even knowing it might end in disaster." Eleanor's eyes widened slightly, but before she could respond, they were interrupted by the appearance of Marco's younger sister, Charlotte, who had flown in from London specifically to meet the woman who had insered her brother. "So, this is the famous Eleanor," Charlotte said, her British accent more pronounced. After years living abroad, like their mother, she made no attempt to hide her suspicion. "The miracle worker who swept my brother off his feet, so to speak." Marco tensed at the deliberate cruelty of the phrasing, but Elena merely smiled, her composure unruffled. "It's lovely to meet you, Charlotte. Marco has told me so much about your photography. I'd love to see your work sometime." Charlotte blinked, wrong-footed by the genuine interest. "Well, perhaps, if you're still around." The encounter set the tone for the increasingly complex social landscape they navigated together. While some in Marco's circle accepted Elena with surprising warmth, others, particularly his family and Victoria's social allies, maintained a cool distance, watching for signs that the marriage was crumbling. Yet instead of weakening under the pressure, their bond seemed to strengthen. Marco found himself looking forward to coming home, to sharing his day with Elena, to hearing her perspective on challenges he faced. Eleanor, in turn, blossomed in her foundation work, her natural empathy and practical nature earning her respect among the staff and beneficiaries alike. 3 months into their marriage, as autumn painted Central Park in fiery hues visible from their penthouse windows, Marco realized something that both thrilled and terrified him. Their arrangement had developed roots neither had anticipated, growing into something that increasingly resembled a real marriage in all but one aspect. That realization came to a head one evening as they returned from a particularly successful foundation event. Eleanor had secured a major donation from a tech industry philanthropist who had previously ignored Marco's overtures, her genuine passion for the foundation's work convincing him where Marco's business approach had failed. "You were amazing tonight," Marco said as they entered the penthouse, genuinely impressed. "Jacob Winters has been dodging my calls for 2 years, and you got him to commit 5 million in one conversation." Elena smiled, the confidence she'd gained over the months evident in her relaxed posture. "I just spoke to him honestly about the impact the foundation has had on real people. Not everyone responds to data and projections." "You've transformed the foundation," Marco acknowledged, "and more than that, you've transformed this." He gestured between them, "whatever this has become." Elena paused in removing her earrings, something vulnerable flickering in her eyes. "What has it become, Marco? Sometimes I feel like we're playing house, creating something that looks real from the outside, but remains incomplete." The word hung between them, heavy with implication. Marco moved his chair closer to where she stood, reaching for her hand. "Eleanor," he said softly, "I think we both know this stopped being just an arrangement a long time ago." She met his gaze, something unspoken passing between them, a current of possibility neither had allowed themselves to acknowledge. Slowly, Marco tugged her hand, drawing her down until she perched on the arm of his wheelchair, their faces inches apart. "I never expected to feel this way again," he admitted, "to want this connection." Elena's breath hitched, her composure finally cracking to reveal the emotion beneath. "Marco, we can't. This isn't—" Whatever protest she intended was lost as Marco leaned forward, closing the distance between them in a kiss that held all the longing and tenderness he'd been holding back for months. For a breathless moment, Eleanor remained still, and then she was responding with equal fervor, her hands framing his face as the last barriers between them began to crumble. But just as the kiss deepened, the penthouse elevator chimed, announcing an arrival. They broke apart, Elena rising quickly from the wheelchair as the doors slid open to reveal Vivian Bennett, her expression thunderous as she surveyed the scene before her. "Well," she said coldly, I see the charade continues. But I'm afraid your little game is about to end. In her hand, she held a manila envelope which she tossed onto the coffee table with deliberate precision. You might want to ask your wife about her past before this goes any further, Vivian announced, specifically about her connections to the Sinclair family that she so conveniently failed to mention. Marco's gaze shot to Elena, whose face had drained of all color, the happiness of moments before evaporating like morning mist beneath a harsh sun. The manila envelope lay on the coffee table like a bomb waiting to detonate, its innocuous appearance belying the destructive power it contained. Marco stared at it, then at Elena, whose face had turned an alarming shade of white. "What is she talking about?" he asked, his voice low and controlled, despite the sudden hammering of his heart. Elena's lips parted, but no sound emerged. Her eyes, usually so steady and direct, darted between Marco and Vivian with something approaching panic. "Go ahead, tell him," Vivian urged, satisfaction coloring her aristocratic features. "Tell my son how you're Victoria Sinclair's second cousin, how the two of you concocted this entire scheme from the beginning." Marco felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath his wheelchair. "Elena?" With trembling fingers, Elena reached for the envelope and withdrew several photographs and documents. The first photo showed a much younger Elena standing beside Victoria at what appeared to be a family gathering, both smiling into the camera. The second was a screenshot of a social media post from 8 years earlier, Victoria tagging "Mi Prima." Elena in a birthday greeting. "I can explain," Elena finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please do," Marco replied, ice crystallizing around each word. "Explain how my trusted housekeeper just happens to be related to the woman who abandoned me at the altar. Explain how, out of all the households in New York, you ended up in mine." "It's not what it looks like," Elena insisted, finding her voice at last. "Yes, Victoria and I are distant cousins through my mother's side. Our families lost touch years ago when my parents moved back to Mexico. Yet you neglected to mention this rather significant connection when I hired you," Marco observed, wheeling himself slightly away from her, needing physical distance. "Or when Victoria and I began dating, or when I proposed to her, or most tellingly when she humiliated me publicly and I impulsively married you instead." Vivian made a small sound of triumph. "The timing is hardly coincidental, is it? Victoria abandons you, creating a public relations nightmare, and conveniently, her cousin is positioned to step in as the understanding, supportive wife." She turned to Elena with undisguised contempt. "How much is she paying you for your role in this? Or is it a percentage of whatever settlement you can extract from my son?" "That's not true," Elena protested, genuine anguish in her voice. "I didn't even know Victoria was dating Marco until she came to the penthouse that first time. She recognized me immediately, but she begged me not to tell you about our connection. She said it would make things awkward, that it didn't matter because the family relationship was so distant." "And you believed her?" Marco challenged, his mind racing over every interaction, every conversation, searching for signs he'd missed. "I had no reason not to at first," Elena replied. "But as time passed, I saw how she treated you when you weren't looking, how she talked about you to her friends. That's why I tried to warn you, Marco. Not because I was plotting against you, but because I was trying to protect you." "From your own cousin," Marco remarked bitterly. "How convenient." Vivian moved to stand beside her son, placing a protective hand on his shoulder. "You need to leave," she told Elena firmly. "The charade is over. My lawyers will contact you regarding annulment proceedings." For a moment, Elena looked as though she might collapse, her composure finally shattering completely. "Marco, please," she pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. "Everything between us has been real. Yes, I should have told you about Victoria, but I was afraid. Afraid you wouldn't believe my warnings, afraid you would dismiss me, afraid I would lose you." The raw emotion in her voice gave Marco pause, a flicker of doubt interrupting his sense of betrayal. "If what you're saying is true, why would Victoria orchestrate something so elaborate? What could she possibly gain from humiliating me publicly, then having you step in?" "Control," Elena replied simply. "Power. She never loved you, Marco. She loved what marrying you would do for her career, her social standing. When she realized the prenuptial agreement would limit her financial gain, she needed a new strategy. And that strategy was you? Marco scoffed, though uncertainty had begun to creep in. No, I never intended. This marriage was your idea. Remember, Victoria couldn't have predicted that. She was furious when she found out we'd married. This last statement rang true. Victoria's appearance at the board meeting certainly hadn't suggested she approved of their hasty union. Marco's certainty wavered further. I think we've heard enough lies, Vivian interrupted briskly. Eleanor, pack your things. You'll be gone by morning. Eleanor stood her ground, drawing herself up with the dignity that had first caught Marco's attention. With respect, Mrs. Bennet, that's not your decision to make. This is between Marco and me. This is my family you've infiltrated, Vivian snapped. My son you've manipulated. Mother, Marco said quietly, Elena is right. This is between us. He looked up at Elena, conflict evident in his expression. I need time to think, to sort through this. Elena nodded, tears spilling onto her cheeks. I understand. I'll stay in the guest room tonight. Tomorrow we can decide what happens next. After she left the room, Vivian rounded on her son. I can't possibly be considering believing her. The evidence is right in front of you. Marco stared at the photographs, at the undeniable connection between the two women who had so profoundly shaped his recent life. The evidence shows they're related, he acknowledged. It doesn't prove a conspiracy. You're blinded by whatever feelings you've developed for this woman, Vivian insisted. She's played you masterfully, Marco, just like Victoria did. Perhaps, Marco agreed. Exhaustion, suddenly weighing on him. But I need to be certain before I dismantle a relationship that has become... He hesitated, searching for the right word. Important to me. After Vivian finally departed, extracting a promise that Marco would consult the family attorneys before making any decisions, he sat alone in the darkened living room, staring at the city lights beyond the windows. The kiss he and Elena had shared just before his mother's arrival now seemed tainted, its sweetness corrupted by doubt. Sleep eluded him that night, his mind replaying every moment with Eleanor since she'd first entered his home 3 years earlier. Had there been signs he'd missed? Had her warnings about Victoria been calculated to position herself as the trustworthy alternative? Or was she telling the truth, caught in an impossible situation not of her making? By morning, Marco had reached a decision. He found Elena in the kitchen, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, preparing coffee with the same care she always showed for his preferences. I need proof, he said without preamble. Not of your innocence, but of Victoria's guilt. If what you're saying is true, if this was her plan rather than yours, there must be evidence. Hope flickered in Elena's exhausted face. I've been thinking about that all night. Victoria is careful, but she's also arrogant. She wouldn't be able to resist documenting her triumph somehow. Her social media has been scrubbed of anything incriminating, Marco noted, accepting the coffee Elena handed him. My team checked thoroughly after the cathedral incident. Not her public accounts, Eleanor agreed. But Victoria keeps a private Instagram for close friends and family. She's always been obsessed with cultivating her image, even within our family circle. Marco raised an eyebrow. And you have access to this account? I used to years ago, Elena explained. She probably changed the password, but she's surprisingly predictable about such things. Always variations on the same theme. Try it, Marco urged, a plan forming. If we can find concrete evidence that Victoria orchestrated this independently, without your involvement. For the first time since Vivian's bombshell, a genuine smile touched Eleanor's lips. You want to believe me? Marco's expression remained guarded. I want the truth, Elena, whatever it is. With Marco's tech expertise and Elena's knowledge of Victoria's patterns, they spent the morning attempting to access her private social media accounts. Their breakthrough came shortly after noon, when Elena successfully logged into Victoria's secondary Instagram account, using a password combining Victoria's childhood dog's name and her favorite designer. "I'm in," Elena announced, her voice tight with anticipation. Marco wheeled himself beside her, close enough to see the screen but maintaining a careful distance between them. The account was filled with carefully curated images of Victoria's privileged life. Exclusive parties, exotic vacations, designer purchases, but nothing overtly incriminating. "Check her direct messages," Marco suggested. "If she was coordinating with anyone, that's where the evidence would be." Elena navigated to the message section, scrolling through conversations until she froze, her finger hovering over a thread with someone named JT Productions. "This is Jason Turner," she explained. "He runs a PR firm specializing in crisis management and image creation. Victoria has used him for years to stage candid paparazzi photos." The messages between Victoria and Jason dated back 9 months, beginning shortly after her engagement to Marco. The early exchanges were innocuous enough, discussions about coordinating press coverage of the upcoming society wedding, but 3 months before the wedding, the tone shifted dramatically. "Look at this," Elena said, pointing to a specific message from Victoria. "The prenup is ironclad. I've had 3 separate lawyers review it. The disability clause limits my settlement, significantly if I leave him after the marriage. We need to adjust the strategy." Jason had replied, "If marriage isn't profitable, what about public sympathy? Jilted lover narrative could boost your profile substantially. Right timing could create a bidding war for exclusive interviews, book deals." The smoking gun came in Victoria's response. "Love it. Working with a compassionate angle. Couldn't go through with trapping myself in a marriage to a man who can't fully satisfy me. We'll need to coordinate timing for maximum impact. Thinking cathedral steps for the dramatic exit. Thoughts?" Marco sat back in his wheelchair, a complex mixture of emotions crossing his face. Hurt at the calculated cruelty, vindication that his instincts about Elena had been correct, relief that their connection hadn't been based on deception. "Keep scrolling," he urged quietly. "Let's see if she mentions you at all." Elena continued through the messages, finding the evidence they sought in an exchange dated the day after their hasty wedding. Victoria: "That bitch Elena has ruined everything. She actually married him." Jason: "This could work to our advantage. Desperate rebound narrative, plus gold digger angle. Marco looks pathetic. You look justified in leaving." Victoria: "She's my fucking cousin, Jason. Distant but still family. She was supposed to be my eyes and ears in his household, not steal my backup plan." Jason: "Wait, you know her? Did she betray you, or was this always her plan?" Victoria: "She warned him about me, tried to sabotage things. I thought I'd handled her, but clearly not. Need to discredit her completely. My mother says she's always been jealous of me, probably saw her chance and took it." The exchange continued, detailing Victoria's rage and her growing determination to destroy Marco and Elena's marriage through strategic leaks to the press and pressure from Marco's family. "She never expected us to actually marry," Elena said quietly. "In her mind, I was just the help, someone to spy on you and report back. When I refused and tried to warn you instead, she wrote me off as inconsequential. And then I proposed to you," Marco added, the pieces finally fitting together, destroying her narrative completely. "Exactly." Elena set the tablet down, meeting Marco's gaze directly. "I should have told you about our connection. That was my mistake, and I'm deeply sorry for it. But everything else between us has been genuine, Marco. Every word, every moment." Marco was silent for a long moment, processing everything they'd discovered. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady with newfound certainty. "We need to take this public," he decided. "Not just to clear your name, but to protect ourselves from whatever Victoria is planning next." Elena's eyes widened. "You believe me?" "I do," Marco confirmed, reaching for her hand. "More than that, I trust you, Elena. I think I have from the beginning, which is why this hit me so hard. The thought that you might have been playing me all along." "Never," Elena said fiercely, squeezing his hand. "What started as an arrangement has become the most important relationship of my life." The admission hung between them, weighted with implication. Marco tugged gently on her hand, drawing her closer until she perched on the arm of his wheelchair, an echo of their position before Vivian's interruption the previous night. "We should finish our conversation from last night," he suggested, a warmth returning to his eyes that had been absent since his mother's revelation. Eleanor smiled tentatively. "I believe we were discussing how this arrangement has evolved into something neither of us anticipated." "Indeed," Marco agreed, his hand moving to cup her cheek, something real, something worth fighting for. This time when they kissed, there was no interruption, no shadow of doubt to darken the moment. Marco pulled Elena fully into his lap, her arms winding around his neck as they deepened the connection that had been building between them for months. Later, as they formulated their strategy to counter Victoria's machinations, Marco's phone buzzed with a text from James. "Turn on CNN, now." They switched on the television to find Victoria giving a tearful interview, claiming that Marco's hasty marriage to Elena had been a devastating blow after she'd simply asked for time to reconsider their relationship. "I never abandoned him," she insisted, dabbing at artfully smudged mascara. "I just needed space to make sure we were doing the right thing. Instead, he immediately married my own cousin, a woman who has envied me her entire life, who deliberately positioned herself in his household to steal him away." The interviewer leaned forward eagerly. "Are you suggesting this was premeditated, that Elena Rodriguez, now Elena Bennett, deliberately orchestrated your separation?" Victoria nodded solemnly. "I have evidence that she's been planning this for years. Marco is vulnerable because of his condition. He doesn't always see when people are taking advantage of him." Marco muted the television, his expression hardening. "She's escalating, using my disability to paint me as mentally compromised, using your family connection to paint you as calculating." "What do we do?" Elena asked, visibly shaken by the viciousness of the attack. Marco's lips curved in a determined smile. "We fight back, with the truth." Within hours, Marco's legal team had secured a competing interview on a rival network. Unlike Victoria's carefully scripted performance, Marco insisted on a live segment, with Elena beside him. "I want the public to see us together, responding in real time," he explained to the nervous network executives. "No editing, no careful framing, just the unvarnished truth." As they prepared in the green room, Eleanor gripped Marco's hand tightly. "Are you sure about this? We could release the messages anonymously. Let them speak for themselves." "Victoria made this personal," Marco replied firmly. "She's attacking not just our marriage, but your character and my agency. I won't let that stand." When the cameras went live, Marco appeared calm and collected, the respected tech visionary the public had come to know. Eleanor sat beside him, nervous but composed, her simple elegance a stark contrast to Victoria's dramatic emotional display on the competing network. "Let me be clear," Marco began, addressing the interviewer directly. "My marriage to Elena was not planned or premeditated. It began as an impulsive decision after Victoria's deliberately public rejection, a rejection we now know was calculated for maximum media impact and financial gain." He proceeded to outline the evidence they'd discovered, sharing selected screenshots from Victoria's private conversations with her PR consultant that had been authenticated by independent experts. As he spoke, Elena watched him with growing admiration, struck by his willingness to be vulnerable publicly for her sake. "Elena did not tell me about her distant family connection to Victoria," Marco acknowledged, taking full responsibility. "That was a mistake born of fear that I wouldn't believe her concerns about Victoria's intentions, fear that she would lose her position in my household, but everything else between us has been genuine." The interviewer turned to Elena. "And what would you say to people who still believe this was an elaborate plan to secure Mr. Bennett's fortune?" Eleanor met the camera's gaze directly. "I would say look at the evidence. Look at Victoria's own words, plotting to abandon Marco at the altar for publicity. Look at her rage when our marriage disrupted her narrative." She took a deep breath, then continued with quiet dignity. "But most importantly, I would say look at us. Our relationship may have begun unconventionally, but what we've built together is real. I love Marco, Not his money, not his company, not what he can do for me. I love him for the man he is. The public declaration caught Marco by surprise, his eyes widening as he turned to Elena. The cameras captured the genuine emotion on his face as he reached for her hand. "And I love Elena," he confirmed, speaking as much to her as to the audience. Not as a refuge from humiliation or a shield against loneliness, but as the remarkable woman she is. The woman who sees me completely and loves me anyway. As the interview concluded, social media exploded with reactions. The hashtag #OckerTeamBennett began trending, with users dissecting Victoria's manipulations and celebrating Marco and Eleanor's authentic connection. The tide of public opinion, which had been so cruelly against them after Victoria's cathedral spectacle, began to turn decisively in their favor. "That went better than I expected," Marco admitted as they returned to the penthouse, emotionally drained but victorious. Elena nodded, still processing the enormity of what they'd done and the public declarations they'd made. "Did you mean it?" she asked quietly. "What you said about loving me?" Marco guided his wheelchair to stop directly in front of her, taking both her hands in his. "Every word. I think I've been falling in love with you since long before our wedding, Eleanor. I just didn't recognize it until I faced the possibility of losing you." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but these were different from the anguished ones she'd shed the previous night. "I've loved you for so long," she confessed, at first from a distance, knowing it could never be, then up close, afraid to hope for more than our arrangement offered. "I never dreamed you could love me back." "Not only do I love you," Marco assured her, drawing her down for a tender kiss, "but I choose you, Elena. Every day, in every way. This marriage may have started as a business arrangement, but I want it to continue as a true partnership. If you'll have me." In answer, Eleanor slid into his lap, winding her arms around his neck as their lips met again, sealing a promise that had evolved from convenience to commitment, from arrangement to love. But even as they celebrated their newfound clarity, Victoria was making one final desperate move to destroy what they had built, a move that would test their bond to its breaking point and force them both to confront truths they'd long buried about themselves and each other. Victoria's final assault came not through the media or through Marco's family, but through a more insidious channel. 3 days after the televised interview that had swung public opinion firmly toward Marco and Elena, a plain manila envelope was delivered to their penthouse. "I'm getting tired of these envelopes," Marco remarked dryly as Elena handed it to him, though his attempt at humor couldn't disguise the tension in his shoulders. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a psychological evaluation from 8 years earlier, immediately following Marco's skiing accident. The evaluation detailed his depression, his rage at his changed circumstances, his suicidal ideation during the darkest days of his recovery. Attached was a note in Victoria's elegant handwriting. "How much is your privacy worth, Marco? Meet me tomorrow alone or this goes public." Marco stared at the document, his face draining of color. "How did she get this?" Elena sat beside him, reading over his shoulder. "Your medical records should be private. This is illegal, Marco." "Not if she got it from someone who had legal access," Marco replied grimly. "Like Charlotte. She was my healthcare proxy during my recovery when my parents were traveling." "You think your sister would betray you like this?" Elena asked, though the evidence of the Bennett family's determination to end their marriage was undeniable. Marco's hands tightened on the paper, crinkling its edges. "Charlotte has always been susceptible to my mother's influence, and my mother has made it abundantly clear she believes you're a threat to the family fortune." The disclosure of his psychological state during that vulnerable period would do more than embarrass him. It could potentially trigger a review of his leadership at Bennett Technologies. The board had stood by him through the wedding scandal and subsequent marriage, but questions about his mental stability might be a bridge too far, especially with stock prices still recovering. "You can't meet with her," Elena insisted. "This is blackmail, Marco. We should go to the police." "And make this public in a different way?" Marco countered. "No, I need to handle Victoria myself. End this once and for all." Elena knelt before his wheelchair, taking his hands in hers. Then we go together. Whatever she has planned, we face it as a team. Marco studied her face, finding only determination and love in her expression. She specifically said to come alone. "Since when do we follow Victoria's instructions?" Eleanor replied, a spark of defiance lighting her eyes. "She's threatened our marriage, your company, and now your privacy. I'm not letting you face her alone." Next morning, they arrived at the specified meeting place, the private dining room of an exclusive restaurant in the meatpacking district. Victoria was already seated, immaculately dressed in a crimson suit that matched the red wine in her glass. Her expression darkened when she saw Elena enter behind Marco. "I said come alone," she snapped, directing her glare at Marco. "My wife and I don't keep secrets from each other," Marco replied calmly, positioning his wheelchair at the table. "Whatever you have to say to me, you can say to both of us." Victoria's perfectly manicured hand tightened around her wine glass. How touching. The arranged marriage has become a love match. "What do you want, Victoria?" Marco asked directly. "The psychological evaluation is private medical information. Releasing it would be illegal." "Perhaps," Victoria conceded with a shrug. "But once it's out there, the damage would be done. Are you prepared for the world to see you at your weakest? For your board to question whether you've truly recovered? For shareholders to wonder if the man guiding their investments is stable?" Elena leaned forward, her voice low but fierce. "Haven't you done enough? You publicly humiliated Marco. You tried to destroy my reputation. You manipulated his family against us. What more do you want?" Victoria's gaze shifted to Eleanor, cold hatred crystallizing her features. "I want what should have been mine. Recognition, status, the Bennett name." "You never loved me," Marco observed, the realization no longer painful but simply fact. "You only loved what I represented." "Don't be naive, Marco," Victoria scoffed. "People like us don't marry for love. We marry for advantage. Your father didn't love your mother for her personality. He loved her family connections and her old money. That's how our world works." "Not my world," Marco countered. "Not anymore." Victoria laughed, the sound brittle and without humor. "Because you found true love with the help. How convenient." "What will it take for you to disappear from our lives?" Eleanor asked bluntly. "Money. Is that what this is about?" Victoria's eyes narrowed calculatingly. $5 million. Cash transfer to my offshore account. In exchange, you get this. She tapped the folder containing the psychological evaluation and my permanent absence from your lives. Marco sat back, studying Victoria with new clarity. She had once seemed so sophisticated, so perfect, the ideal partner to complement his success. Now he saw only emptiness, a beautiful shell with nothing of substance inside. "No," he said simply. Victoria blinked, clearly not expecting refusal. "Excuse me?" "I said no," Marco repeated firmly. "I won't pay you a cent. In fact, I've already instructed my legal team to file for a restraining order against you. This meeting is being recorded, with your knowledge now, as evidence of attempted blackmail." He gestured toward the small lapel pin on his jacket, a tiny camera capturing every word and expression. "You wouldn't dare," Victoria hissed, her composure finally cracking. "Your precious privacy is less important than ending your manipulation," Marco interrupted. "Release the evaluation if you want. Yes, I was in a dark place after my accident. Yes, I contemplated ending my life when I thought I had lost everything. But I survived. I rebuilt. I found purpose. And eventually, with Eleanor, I found love." He reached for Elena's hand, drawing strength from her steady presence. "You can't hurt me anymore, Victoria. Not with this, not with anything." Victoria's face contorted with rage. "You think you've won? That this little domestic fantasy with your servant will last? She'll tire of playing nurse eventually, Marco. She'll want a real man, one who can give her everything she needs." The cruel barb struck its target, a flicker of pain crossing Marco's face before he controlled his expression. But Eleanor was already on her feet, her patience finally exhausted. "You have no idea what Marco gives me," she said, her voice vibrating with emotion. You see only his wheelchair, his limitations. I see his strength, his brilliance, his capacity for growth and love. He satisfies me in ways you could never comprehend, because you're incapable of genuine connection." She leaned closer to Victoria, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "A wheelchair doesn't define a man, Victoria. But your ugliness defines you wholly and completely." For once, Victoria had no ready retort, stunned by the raw honesty of Elena's defense. Marco reached for Elena's hand, tugging her gently back to his side. "We're done here," he announced, turning his wheelchair toward the exit. "My attorneys will be in touch regarding the restraining order and charges of blackmail and privacy violation." As they left Victoria sitting alone with her schemes in ruins around her, Marco felt a weight lifting that he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. Outside, in the bright spring sunshine, he pulled Elena down for a kiss that carried all his gratitude and love. "I should have let you handle Victoria from the beginning," he said with a smile when they parted. "You're formidable when provoked." Elena laughed, a sound of genuine relief. "I've waited 3 years to tell her exactly what I think of her. It was rather satisfying." As they made their way home, Marco grew unusually quiet, his expression thoughtful. Elena respected his silence, sensing he was processing the confrontation and its implications. It wasn't until they reached the penthouse that he finally shared his thoughts. "What Victoria said about you growing tired of me, of my limitations." He hesitated, vulnerability evident in his eyes. "I need to ask, is that something that concerns you? That this," he gestured to his wheelchair, "might eventually become too much?" Eleanor knelt before him, taking his face in her hands. "Marco Bennett, I need you to listen carefully. I fell in love with you exactly as you are. Your wheelchair is part of your journey, but it's not what defines you to me." She stroked his cheek tenderly. "What defines you is your resilience, your intelligence, your capacity for growth, and yes, your body too, all of it, exactly as it is." The earnestness in her expression melted the last of Marco's reservations. "I don't deserve you," he murmured. "Probably not," Elena agreed with a teasing smile. "But you're stuck with me anyway." The next few weeks brought a flurry of changes. Victoria, facing criminal charges for attempted blackmail and privacy violations, fled to Europe rather than face court proceedings. Marco's mother, finally recognizing the depth of their commitment, began a tentative reconciliation, inviting them to the family estate in Boston for a weekend that was awkward but promising. Most significantly, Marco and Elena began planning a vow renewal ceremony, a chance to publicly affirm the genuine love that had grown from their pragmatic beginning. Unlike their hasty first wedding, this would be a celebration with friends and family, a true expression of their journey together. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Elena asked one evening as they reviewed potential venues. "Our legal marriage is secure now. We don't need the public spectacle." Marco set aside the tablet they'd been browsing. "This isn't about legal validation," he explained. "It's about celebrating how far we've come. When we first married, it was a business arrangement born of pride and practicality. Now it's the most important relationship in my life. I want to honor that transformation." Eleanor smiled, her expression softening. "When you put it that way, how can I possibly object?" They chose the Brooklyn Botanic Garden for the ceremony, its lush spring blooms and serene pathways offering a dramatic counterpoint to the cold grandeur of the cathedral where Marco's first wedding had so disastrously unfolded. Elena selected a simple but elegant gown in soft ivory, while Marco commissioned a bespoke suit that complemented his wheelchair rather than trying to disguise it. The guest list was deliberately intimate, close. Friends, supportive colleagues, family members who had come to accept their union. James, who had become Elena's unlikely ally in navigating Marco's business world, agreed to serve as best man, while Elena asked Susan Reynolds, who had welcomed her so warmly at that first gala, to be her matron of honor. On the morning of the EUC Cow ceremony, Marco found himself alone in the garden's preparation room, adjusting his tie with uncharacteristic nervousness. A knock at the door revealed Charlotte, hesitant and flushed. "May I come in?" she asked, lingering at the threshold. Marco nodded, studying his sister's face. They hadn't spoken privately since the confrontation over Victoria's blackmail attempt, the revelation of Charlotte's possible involvement, creating a rift between them. Charlotte closed the door and took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology, Marco, a significant one." "For which part?" Marco asked, his tone more weary than angry. "For never accepting Elena. For potentially giving Victoria access to my private medical records." "For all of it," Charlotte admitted, wringing her hands. "But I didn't give Victoria those records, Max. I would never betray you that way." Marco raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "Then how did she get them?" "She dated one of your former doctors briefly last year, Dr. Landon, the one who did your final physical therapy evaluation." Charlotte's expression was pained. "I only learned this recently when Mother and I were trying to trace the leak. It seems Victoria has been planning this for longer than any of us realized." The revelation should have angered Marco, but instead, he felt only relief that his sister hadn't betrayed him so deeply. "Why are you telling me this now, Charlotte?" She moved closer, her usual aristocratic composure cracking to reveal the vulnerability beneath. "Because I've been wrong about Elena, about your marriage. I was so convinced she was using you that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. How happy she makes you, how complete you are together." Tears welled in her eyes, and Charlotte did something she hadn't done since they were children. She leaned down and hugged him tightly. "I want my brother back," she whispered. "I miss you." Marco returned the embrace, feeling another piece of his past find proper resolution. "I've missed you too, Char." When she pulled back, Charlotte wiped her eyes carefully. "Elena came to see me, last week. She insisted we clear the air before the ceremony." "She didn't tell me that," Marco said, surprised. "She wouldn't, would she?" Charlotte replied with newfound respect. "She's fiercely protective of you, but not in the smothering way Mother is. Elena told me that family was too important to let pride and misunderstandings create permanent divisions." Marco smiled, his heart swelling with love for his wife. "That sounds like Elena." "You did good, little brother," Charlotte said softly. "Much better than any of us gave you credit for." As guests gathered in the garden's cherry esplanade, Marco took his position beneath an arch of spring blooms, James at his side. The string quartet began Pachelbel's canon in D, and all heads turned to watch Elena appear on the pathway, radiant in her simple gown. But it was her face that truly captivated, the open love in her expression, the quiet confidence of a woman who had found her place in the world. As she moved toward him, Marco was struck by how far they had both come from that first impulsive agreement in his penthouse. When Eleanor reached him, she handed her bouquet to Susan and took Marco's outstretched hands. "Before we exchange our formal vows," Marco said, his voice carrying clearly to their assembled guests, "I want to acknowledge the unconventional path that brought us here. Our marriage began as an arrangement, a practical solution to a painful situation." Murmurs of appreciation rippled through the gathering. Their story had become well known after the media confrontation with Victoria. "But what started as convenience evolved into the most profound connection of my life," Marco continued, his eyes fixed on Elena's. "You saw me, Elena. Not the wheelchair, not the bank account, not the company. Just me with all my flaws and strengths. You challenged me to be better, to see beyond the narrow confines of the world I'd constructed for myself." Elena smiled through gathering tears. "When you proposed that first time, I thought you were crazy," she admitted, prompting laughter from their guests. "I accepted out of loyalty and practicality. I never imagined I was saying yes to my own happiness." She squeezed his hands tightly. "You've given me so much more than a changed social position or financial security, Marco. You've given me partnership, respect and love I never thought possible. You've shown me that true strength lies not in physical capability, but in emotional courage." They exchanged rings, not the simple bands from their first hasty ceremony, but rings they had designed together, incorporating elements meaningful to their journey. The officiant guided them through their vows, traditional words now infused with deeper understanding of what commitment truly meant. "I now pronounce you, once again but more truly than ever, husband and wife," the officiant concluded with a warm smile. You may kiss your bride." Marco tugged Elena gently onto his lap, cradling her face in his hands as they shared a kiss that sealed their renewed promises. Their guests erupted in applause and cheers, celebrating not just a wedding, but a genuine love story that had overcome every obstacle placed in its path. The reception that followed was joyous and relaxed, a stark contrast to the formal events of Marco's previous social circle. Elena had insisted on including touches from her own heritage, Mexican folk music, alongside the classical quartet, traditional foods served alongside gourmet offerings. The resulting celebration was a perfect blend of their two worlds, much like their marriage itself. As evening fell and lanterns illuminated the garden paths, Marco found Elena sitting at the edge of the dance floor, watching guests with a contented smile. He guided his wheelchair beside her, taking her hand in his. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. "About saying yes that first time?" Elena turned to him, her eyes luminous in the lantern light. "Not one," she replied firmly. "Every step, every challenge brought us here. I wouldn't change a moment of it." Marco raised her hand to his lips. "I would," he admitted. "I would have seen you sooner, Elena. Really seen you, instead of looking past you for so long. Perhaps you weren't ready then," Elena suggested gently. "Some journeys can't be rushed." "And where does our journey go from here?" Marco asked, twining his fingers with hers. Elena's smile widened. "Wherever we choose, together. That's the beauty of what we've built, isn't it? The freedom to define our own path." As the celebration continued around them, Marco was struck by how completely his life had transformed since that humiliating day at the cathedral. What had begun as the worst moment of his life had led, through unexpected twists and hard-won growth, to his greatest happiness. Elena had not healed his body. His paralysis remained a permanent reality. But she had healed something deeper, the wounded spirit that had been hiding behind success and status for so long. In loving her, he had learned to truly love himself, limitations and all. And Elena, who had entered his home as an employee, had found her own transformation. She had discovered her strength, her voice, her capacity to stand firmly in her truth, even when the world tried to diminish her. In protecting Marco, she had found her own power. They had begun as strangers bound by a pragmatic arrangement. They had become partners united by genuine love, and as they sat together under the stars, surrounded by people who had witnessed their journey, both knew that the vows they had renewed were stronger than any they could have made before their love had been tested and proven resilient. "Dance with me?" Marco asked softly as the music shifted to a slow melody. Elena's smile lit her face as she settled onto his lap, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Always," she promised, as Marco guided them in gentle circles beneath the lantern light, two people who had found home in each other's hearts. Beloved listeners, we hope you've been moved by Marco and Elena's journey from an arrangement of convenience to a love that defied all expectations. Their story reminds us that true connection often comes when we least expect it, and that seeing someone for who they truly are is the greatest gift we can offer. If you enjoyed this emotional roller coaster, we've curated a special playlist of equally captivating stories about unexpected love and second chances. Find it by clicking the link to your left. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video to help us continue bringing these unique stories that explore life's complexities. What did you think about Marco and Elena's journey? We can't wait to read your thoughts in the comments section below.